Hi everyone, I'm Varun, and today I'll be doing a deep dive into the concept of entities and calculations on Tabletop Mirror. Before that though, I want to apologize for the long wait on this video, as well as thank you all for helping us hit our first 100 users. I'm extremely thankful to each and every person who engaged with me, learned about TTM, and helped spread the word, so sincerely, thank you. Coming back on topic, today we'll be discussing the idea of an entity and go over the process of defining some of the fields for abilities. After that, I'll build on that knowledge to show you how character derivations work. Firstly, what are entities? When we talk about entities on TTM, we're referring to abilities, classes, feats, heritages, items, and spells. Really, all of the parts of building a character. It's also basically everything under the Characters tab of the navigation bar. What's important about entities is their entity fields. We touched on this idea in a previous deep dive, but now we're going to go into detail about what these fields are and how they enable some pretty powerful functionalities. Let's hop into our rules system editor. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of rule systems on TTM, take a look at our mechanics and rules deep dive. Going straight into the abilities tab, let's scroll down to ability fields and create a few. Ability fields are entity fields unique to all abilities. By defining the fields here, we mandate that all abilities in our system are required to have these fields. It's kind of like creating a framework of what makes an ability in your system. To demonstrate, we'll make some basic fields. For organization purposes, we'll also group them when it makes sense. First, the isRanged field. This is just a simple checkbox indicating if the ability is ranged or not. Remember, due to the advanced searching functions on TTM, creating fields like this might also be useful for making it easier to find things when you're searching through your system. Next, we'll also create a range field. We could leave this as an alphanumerical field so people could type their own range with the units, but it might be better if we make it a numerical field so that other abilities can double the range or add to the range a static number. Finally, we'll make an alphanumeric field called ability type. This helps us classify the magic and non-magic abilities in our system. We'll also restrict the possible values to mundane and magic to better standardize things. Before we save, notice how we grouped the range stuff together but left the ability type ungrouped. This is purely organizational, but it might have a big impact on the homebrewing experience of your game masters. Now let's go make an ability. Keep in mind that even though I'm the system designer, my experience creating abilities is going to be very similar to game masters who want to homebrew in my system. When we create our simple ability, it's going to be marked as not core legal for now, though as a system designer we could also change that. Putting that aside for now, let's edit the ability. You'll notice that abilities have a few preset fields provided by TTM. We'll talk about this in more detail when we do an abilities deep dive, but for now, notice that our custom ability type field is here too, with a drop-down of all the possible values we specified earlier. There's also a section for our ranged details grouping. Also, we can now see that we made a minor mistake. We created another ranged field that's pretty identical to the one that we provide on TTM. So let's take a note to also delete this when we edit our ability fields. Otherwise, abilities have a lot of other provided functionalities that we'll talk about in a different deep dive. For now, let's share and save. I have some ideas of how we can improve this ability. Going back to our system editor, let's add a better overview. We can use Markdown and also provide places to put some of our abilities data, kind of like a blank spot for TTM to fill. To do that, we just have to use some double curly braces to surround the data we want to add, prefixed by ability, and also a period. We can also use some conditional formatting to either put our ability's range or the word none depending on whether or not the ability is ranged. In the near future, we're going to be updating this process to make it a little easier to do, but for now, the docs have a lot of resources about the formatting and conditional formatting parts of the overview. When we save this overview, all abilities will be displayed in the same way in our system. It's very useful for customizing the look and feel of your system. While we're here, let's also add a new field and leave it very open-ended. We'll also add another possible value for semi-magical abilities and delete the unnecessary field. Going back to our ability, you can see our dropdown now has a new option, and we have a new open-ended field. We also no longer have the extra range field that we created. Whenever ruleset editors change the entity fields, those changes will automatically update and sync across all entities. If the editor deletes a field that you have data in, don't worry, it'll ask you to manually review it before it deletes it. That's basically the overview of entity fields. They work pretty similarly for the other kinds of entities, and we'll go into more detail for each of the respective types of entities in their respective deep dive. Now let's go back to the ruleset editor and talk about character derivations. In many ways, character derivations are like advanced entity fields, specifically for characters. If you have fields that need inputs like a skill point system, you would use a character derivation rather than an entity field. To get started, you create a derivation group. This is partially organizational, but it's also functional. We'll talk about it shortly. For now, let's just make 3 groups: attributes, skills, and overall. Notice that as we make these groups, 3 tabs appear in the derivations section, one for each group. For our attributes, let's say we want to make it so that each player will get 1 attribute point every level. To do that, let's make the points calculation scale with your character level. Notice the structure of this bonus. First, we take the calculated stat, add some number, divide by another number, and then because we use strict rounding, we're going to round the divided result before multiplying by yet another number and adding the rightmost number. If you have questions, the docs on TTM have plenty of additional details about this specific editor. To check that we did it right, notice how it says that our points is now equal to our character level. That's 1 per level. Let's say we also want to cap the maximum points in any of these stats at 5. We do that by specifying the point mappings, but only up to 5. We'll also incentivize a full investment by giving an extra bonus +1 if you put in 5 points. We don't have any initial inputs, so we'll only specify the point mappings for level ups. Finally, let's create 2 derivations called body and mind, and specify that players can invest their points in either of these 2 stats. In some D20 systems, we might call these stats strength, dexterity, constitution, and so on. And maybe we'll make it invest every 4 levels rather than every level. Going to the skills tab, we'll approach it a little differently. There's no allowed investment by characters in our system. Instead, your thinking skill is just 5 plus your mind stat. To make it easier, we'll just copy and rename this derivation to also make the moving skill, which will do the same thing but with body. Lastly, in the overall tab, we'll make a single derivation called skillfulness. We won't allow any point investments here either, and we'll also use the advanced tab for the bonus editor. Let's set the operation to max and simply add both of the 2 skills here. In other words, the skillfulness stat is just going to be the highest skill value. When we save, we can see that it kept all of our calculations, including our max operation, as expected. We use your defined derivations in many different places, so we'll keep coming back to how these derivations are used in future deep dives, starting with next week's character sheet deep dive. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Now, we covered a lot of content in today's deep dive, so if you have any questions, join us on other platforms or leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, that's all we have. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing or joining us on one of our other platforms so you can stay up to date with all of our improvements. Thanks for watching, see you next time.